Hello, welcome to the Tournament Center. I'm Brian David Marshall. I'm here with Pro Tour Hall of Famer Luis Scott Vargas. And Luis, we're going to watch Marcio Carvalho draft this new Aether Revolt Kaladesh draft format. Last year on the Pro Tour, he was the Draft Master. It means he was the best limited player on the Pro Tour across all 4 Pro Tours. What do you think we can expect to see from Marcio Carvalho as he sits down to draft this new format?
He seems to tend towards aggressive decks, and talking to a lot of people about the format, that's where they think the format lines up. So I'd kind of be surprised if you didn't draft an aggressive deck, but of course the cards are going to determine that.
Sure. What are the cards that you look for to sort of indicate an aggressive strategy there? You're going to look at Marcio Carvalho behind us. What's a premium common creature in an aggressive deck? Here, we'll just start looking at this pack and see what he does here. Hungry Flames, a classic just removal spell. Do you see anything that you're going to go with over Hungry Flames here?
No, Hungry Flames really does leap out at me. It's just a premium removal spell, also fits into the aggressive decks quite well.
Yeah.
And I don't think Marcio had much of a hesitation there either.
Yeah. Nothing else there really jumps out as being super first pickable.
No, if you're already blue-green, something like Rogue Refiner is a great card, but starting with a gold card of that power level is not really where you want to be. So taking the more powerful monocolor card, certainly what you want to do.
Yeah. So now, once you're looking at red, what are the creatures you're looking to fill out with here?
So it's funny, when you mentioned what are the premium commons, Aether Chaser is actually top of the list, and that is, of course, a red common. So Aether Chaser would go great with Hungry Flames. Iron Tread Crusher gets a little bit of value once you combine it with an aggressive red deck.
Ooh. How do you like a Maverick Thopterist?
See, Maverick Thopterist is very appealing here. It is a gold card, but you already have a red card, so it's like that effect is mitigated. You're already red, and Maverick Thopterist is just a great card.
Right, so it has improvised, so even though it costs 5, you can sometimes play it on turn 3 in this format, and it also makes 2 Thopter tokens when it comes into play.
So it fuels your further improvised cards as well. And just, it's one card that provides, 3 bodies, 2/2 in the air, and 2/2 on the ground, and that is quite good.
So good start here for Marcio Carvalho.
Yeah, of note also, red-blue in triple Kaladesh was kind of regarded as the worst of the 10 color combinations. That is no longer the case. Red-blue actually has legs now, and well, you see one of the commons there, Bastion Inventor, quite good.
Scrapper Champion, wow. Also a very solid card. Oh, and an Aether Chaser. This is Aether Chaser. This is like the card you mentioned as being one of the best commons in the set.
Yeah, and also a Skyship Plunder. All these cards are quite strong. It's a little bit safer to take a red card here because you're more likely to end up red than blue. Scrapper Champion, of course, is very, very powerful. Just by itself, it attacks as a 3/3 double striker the first time you attack with it.
Yeah. And it gives you a little energy, and if you have consistent sources of energy, you can get it. It can get really active.
2 red cards and a red-blue gold card. If he sees like a great black card in this pack, he doesn't lose as much by switching.
There's a Sweatworks Brawler.
Another very good card, especially in red-blue, which often has an improvised theme. Though, speaking of improvised...
Merchant Dockhand.
Merchant Dockhand is quite powerful. It's a 1-drop for your improvised cards, and in the late game, it gives you a lot of fuel.
Yeah. Anytime you can get an artifact creature, so you get to actually advance your board rather than having to use an implement, it seems like that's just a premium for the like Welder Construct and cards like that for the improvised decks.
Certainly, and now that Marcio has not only an improvised card in Maverick Thopterist, but the Merchant's Dockhand, I would expect him to be leaning more into improvised as those come up. I don't know so far as to play an Ornithopter, but something like Implement of Combustion looks very appealing.
Yeah, and those were really the breakout cards last weekend at the two limited Grand Prix in terms of going up in value cards. We saw people picking higher and higher.
Yeah, and Marcio looks pretty happy to take an Implement here. Just like 5 picks into the pack.
And because even the worst case scenario, that card is a card that we will say cycles. You get to just dig a little bit deeper into your deck with it.
And the improvised decks can play lower land counts if they have a lot of improvised enablers and cards, and that just ends up with a higher threat density.
So Sweatworks Brawler, and then Mobile Garrison was the other card. It looked like he was considering very fleetingly.
Yeah, Sweatworks Brawler I think is a very clear pick there. Marcio didn't hesitate much. In fact, he hasn't hesitated much on most of his picks, which is a combination of the packs having a standout card and Marcio just drafting quickly.
So 3/3 Menace, and that card can come down for you, pretty consistently on turn 3 in these decks.
Yeah, not surprising to have that come out on turn 3. Pretty big fan of Hinterland Drake in this format as well.
He is red-blue, or potentially could still, very likely to be red-blue, so.
Yeah, I would say the odds that he's red-blue are fairly high at this point. I mean, it's going to depend on what he sees, but Hinterland Drake, I think, is the best card in that pack. See, even though Foundry Assembler does have Improvise, the payoff is not quite there. It's one more mana than Sweatworks Brawler and doesn't have Menace, so the comparison is not great there.
All right, there's a Watchful Automaton, a handful of automatons.
A royal sample of automatons.
Yeah, the robot Uprising,
yeah.
But he takes the creature that lets him scry. So again, card that, in the late game might be able to help him pull out ahead of his opponent. Yeah, is that a card you're going to see play? That's going to see play a lot.
Yeah,
though?
People are going to play that card. It's not spectacular, but it is good. And like you said, in the late game, it gives you a pretty big edge if you can activate it a few times.
Filigree Crawler, Reservoir Walker.
And these are also the packs where I would look to see if there's any particular signals of a color that's open. Ghirapur Osprey is not a big signal that white's open. I don't see a reason to jump ship if I'm Marcio right now. Even if you're not firmly tethered into blue, you just have the 2 blue cards.
Filigree Walker, not something he's really going to play. If he can help it. Destructive Tampering, that card I think is terrific.
Yeah, Destructive Tampering is pretty good because it's these 2 narrow effects. Destroy target artifact or creatures without flying can't block this turn. But 2 narrow effects in the same card makes the card actually not that narrow. There's just a lot of situations where it's good. Oh, wow.
You might not want to main deck.
Gift.
Did he just get a Bastion Inventor all the way around the table?
4 cards left in the pack, wow. Bastion Inventor. So this is a perfect situation where Marcio has, Sweatworks Brawler, Bastion Inventor, Maverick Thopterist as payoffs, and I guess now a Foundry Assembler if he wants it. And then he has Merchant Stockhand, Implement of Combustion as, cheap enablers.
So how many enablers is he going to be looking for?
Oh, there's the Ornithopter. One-time Ornithopter.
Do you play Ornithopter in this format?
I would generally advise against playing Ornithopter. Okay. If you go real deep, you can play it, though.
How deep is deep?
You need a lot of Foundry Assemblers and whatnot. But this is a fantastic start. I'd be very happy after this first pack.
Yeah, this is looking really good. What does he need here? Does he need more enablers coming through the first packs, through the second pack?
It's not that he would like more enablers. His deck doesn't need anything right now. This is just a good ratio. He's got only 2 1-drop artifacts. He clearly does want more of those, but those are not that hard to come by, depending on what your bar is for those. I would say that he's good on actual improvised cards. If he has the choice between another Bastion Inventor or an Implement, I would expect to take the Implement at this point.
Okay.
Because he's got more of the high end than the low end, but I think he's in great shape. The fact that he's got a solid removal spell in Hungry Flames, Maverick Thopterist, and Merchant Stockhand as just really powerful cards. Just overall, this is a very, very good start.
Coming out of the Grand Prix, we heard lots of stories about these decks really running light on land. This is not looking to be one of those decks.
Well, it depends on how many cheap improvised cards he can pick up or enablers. A Renegade map, obviously, a very big part of this as well. But if let's say Marcio ends up with another Sweatworks Brawler, another Bastion Inventor, and 4 or 5 more cheap artifacts, yeah, he can play 15, 16 lands.
You see him waiting to look at his second pack. Maybe waiting for his second cup of coffee too. Looks a little sleepy.
When you end up with a deck where your high end is all improvised cards, your curve can end effectively at 3 or 4, and then you can really afford to play fewer lands.
All right, here we go. And Untethered Express jumps to the front of the pack.
Well, it's just one of the best cards in the set. It's above every common, almost every uncommon, depending on where you rate it.
Above Ridgescale Tusker.
I think that first pack, you would rather take the Untethered Express.
Sure.
Yes. But it's very, very close. But Untethered Express is just fantastic. So pretty easy pick there. I guess it's an improvisative enabler too if you need that. But mainly it's a 4 mana for a 5/5, then a 6/6, then a 7/7 Trampler. Yeah, it's the uncommon Renegade Freighter.
One of the most disheartening cards to play against if you don't have an answer for it right away.
Yeah. So always good to start your pick with a premium uncommon. Maybe it doesn't have a mythic rare symbol, but Untethered Express is exactly what Marcio wants because his deck also is skewing aggressive. This is a proactive deck. He is going to be attacking. He wouldn't mind a little bit more disruption, a little bit more removal.
Emerald Gear Seeker. There's another Destructive Tampering, Ravenous Intruder, Aether Swooper.
Aether Swooper is a good pickup here because while it's not an artifact itself, it almost always gets to attack on turn 3 and make a servo with the 2 energy. And so that means that you can go turn 2 Aether Swooper, attack, make a servo, play a Sweatworks Brawler. And look right there, you have 3 creatures and 5 power out on turn 3. 2 of them have evasion. That's just the kind of start that 2 commons add up to just a great start.
Sounds glorious.
Yeah, Aether Chaser may be a little bit better. So if Marcio could pick up one of those, he'd be really happy as well. But Aether Swooper still does what he wants. And with that pick, I would imagine Marcio cemented into red-blue. It would take something truly drastic to move him out of these 2 color codes.
All right, well, there's the Aether Chaser you've been talking about. Another Sweatworks Brawler, a Renegade map, another Bastion.
Oh, this pack's fantastic because I
even
suspect...
a Shipwreck Moray, which is a card he seemed to have wanted a couple times.
Yeah, at this point I would not want him to take Shipwreck Morays for his deck, but getting to pick up Aether Chaser and then have a good chance of wheeling either Bastion Vendor or Sweatworks Brawler seems like a good spot to be in. The first Bastion Vendor wheeling was a really good sign.
Yeah, does take the Aether Chaser there. First strike, 2/1 for 2. I mean, it's just like even without any extra abilities, that card is just a 2/1 first striker. It's a card you'd be pretty happy to play in limited.
That's a great card, and then the fact that it makes a servo for your improvise shenanigans is quite strong as well.
So looking through this pack, Frontline Rebel, card 3/3 for 3. So you're talking about getting to that for the Sweatworks Brawler, but this has the drawback that it has to attack every turn.
There's another interesting card in the pack as well, Consulate Dreadnought, the 1 mana 7/11 crew 6.
It's always open.
One of the reasons that card could be interesting here is it does fuel improvise, and then you have a lot of high power creatures to crew it, but looks like Marcio's going to take the much safer pick of Frontline Rebel. That card is reliably a 3/3, whereas Consulate Dreadnought often can't, sits there unused in the harbor.
There's a Sweatworks Brawler, Precise Strike.
Yeah, Sweatworks Brawler is what Marcio's looking to pick up here.
There's also an implement hanging out of the back of the pack.
Yeah, it's the white one. So off-color implements are a little bit riskier than the on-color ones. You have to be going very, very hard and improvise before you end up in that situation. Again, Marcio would really love, Implement of Combustion, I think, is a very high pick at this point for him, or any other really cheap artifact that does something. Just picking up that additional Sweatworks Brawler. Also, one of the things I'm sure Marcio is keeping in mind is that the Bastion Vendor from a couple picks ago has a pretty good chance of wheeling. And so when you think about that, every time you look at an improvised card, you're like, well, I might just be able to get another one.
Here we see a classic improvised card, Universal Solvent.
Yeah.
Card that, you need 7 mana to use it, but it's, and if that happens, great, but really it's a mana rock for you.
Right, it taps for mana for 4 of Marcio's spells right now, more if he plays Foundry Assembler.
There's Welder Automaton, a card we talked about earlier.
Welder Automaton is exactly what Marcio wants here because it curves into his Sweatwork Brawlers, and it's just a good card in its own right. See, the reason Marcio doesn't want to play a card like Ornithopter, which I know appeals to many, many players, is that besides casting Sweatworks Brawler, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
It's just, O2 by itself is not much of a card, whereas Welder Automaton certainly is a card. It's a very good one. You would play it even if you didn't have Improvise, so that's the kind of enabling that you want to end up with.
So we see a Ravenous Intruder, maybe thinking about his curve here, and also a way to, sacrifice implements if he wants to draw a card, and takes that over a Frontline Rebel.
Yeah, and I think that is a artifact of Marcio's curve, if you want to call it that, because he's got all those Sweatworks Brawlers which come out on turn 3 a lot of the time.
He's got a lot of 3s there, yeah.
So having a 2 is important.
Carry Zev's expertise.
It's actually multiple tricks here.
And Precise Strike.
The reason why Marcio would go Precise Strike over Invigorated Rampage, which is a more powerful card, is that Precise Strike combos very well with Sweatworks Brawler. It has Menace, so they have to block with 2 creatures, and all of a sudden it's a 4/3 first strike. It'll often take down 1 or both of the opponent's creatures.
There's another Ravenous Intruder. There's an Emerald Strike Breaker. It's not Gear Smasher. I don't know why I'm calling it Strike Breaker.
Gear Smasher is kind of like a Ravenous Intruder. It throws the artifacts directly at them.
Yes.
It cuts out the middleman. But
on a stalled board, it can also finish a game, right?
Yeah, I would not expect Marcio to be super excited about playing that card, but it might make it in there.
Takes a Perilous Predicament. Just grabbing some cards here. Looks like Tezzer's Touch near the front of the pack for him. But nothing here that he's thinking about playing. Not contemplating a switch. Gets a Foundry Assembler.
And so the Bastion Vendor didn't wheel this time, but I think Marcio's still fine without it.
Yeah, and we'll get a chance to take a look at what cards he has here.
So, because we're done with Aether Revolt, there's no more improvised cards, but the final count of cards with improvise ended up such that Marcio is still very incentivized to take cheap artifacts because he's got Bastion Vendor, he's got multiple Sweatworks Brawlers, Maverick Thopterist. If he wants, he can play Foundry Assemblers, though those are a little less appealing than the other cards, but it's still enough of a high end of improvise that you're happy to pick up your cheap artifacts.
So what are those cards in Kaladesh? What are the cards maybe that have even changed up in value a little bit because of their role in the improvised deck?
A big one is Cogworker's Puzzle Knot. The 2 mana, make a 1/1 servo, and then you can pay 1 and a white and sack it to make another one. you're going to play that card even without white mana a lot of the time now.
Because it makes 2 mana essentially for your deck.
Turn 2 Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, turn 3 Maverick Thopterist. It's a really hard draw to beat. There's also those Foundry Assemblers, which, again, if Marcio goes deep enough, if he has enough cheap artifacts, Foundry Assembler is reliably being cast for 3, that could make it in there. It's no Sweatworks Brawler, but once you're at like 6 big improvised cards, then you can just start, then you're kind of looking at that Ornithopter, maybe rethinking things, even though I suspect Marcio, you notice he does not have Ornithopter in the pile quite yet.
For someone who's not a big fan of the Ornithopter, you really want to see an Ornithopter.
Oh, I would love to see an Ornithopter. First of all, I think we were going to see Ornithopter in the constructed rounds because, Paradoxical Outcome is a card. Second of all, if we don't get to see one in the limited rounds, I will be disappointed. As much as I am cautioning against the inclusion of Ornithopter, I would love to see an Ornithopter to make its way out here.
What are the fewest lands you've seen in one of these decks? 14.
But it's a little bit deceptive because Renegade map does count as a land essentially. Sure. So 14 and like 2 Renegade maps is kind of like 16. But I think Marcio could legitimately be looking at like a 16 land deck without any maps, because if his high end really does stop at 3 or 4 once you're looking at improvise, and that is like the hallmark of a 16 land deck.
So Chandra's Pyrohelix, a Decoction Module, Glassblowers, Puzzle Knot, Malfunction. Not a super exciting pack here. Chandra's Pyrohelix changed in value at all with the new set?
I think it got slightly better. There's like a couple 3/1s that you like to kill. Aether Chaser is a powerful 2/1. So this is a classic pick of the slightly better card. Pyrohelix certainly better than Eager Construct, but Eager Construct fuels the rest of Marcio's deck. So given how light he is on interaction, I wouldn't be surprised if he took the Pyrohelix, but Eager Construct is something that Marcio is, eager to put in his deck.
He did take the Chandra's Pyrohelix, though.
And that plus Hungry Flames is all he really has to stop the opponent's stuff. I mean, Universal Solvent, I guess, does solve things, but once you get to 7 mana.
Not in a universe where you only have, where your curve tops out at 4, though. There's wow, this is another not great pack for him.
Well, remember that red-blue in triple Kaladesh is not great,
sure.
and you do kind of pay for this here without, though a card like Reckless Fireweaver, speaking of cards that have gone up in value, as you're putting more and more cheap artifacts in your deck, Reckless Fireweaver does do a little bit more damage.
Yeah. Aether Tradewinds maybe the next best option for him in this color.
Aether Tradewinds is certainly a viable card in this deck, but I like the Fireweaver because Marcio's going to have, something like 8 artifacts, 10 artifacts, depending on where he ends up, and Fireweaver can consistently deal a couple damage over the course of the game.
Also gets in the way of an Aether Chaser really nicely.
It does.
There's another Chandra's Pyrohelix, there's a Malfunction, there's another Reckless Fireweaver, and a Glint Nest Crane.
Glint Nest Crane is fantastic. It ups Marcio's artifact count at, virtually, because it helps him find them. And he's going to, I think, have enough artifacts in his deck that he could play it.
You see him counting out with his other hand there.
The question is, does he need an interactive card? Because he is really low in interaction, and that is a reason to take something like Malfunction.
He takes Malfunction over the Helix. It deals with some bigger, more mythic threats.
Yeah, right now, with Marcio's 2 removal spells being a deal 3 in Hungry Flames and a deal 2 or a 1 in Pyrohelix, having Malfunction means he actually has an answer for a Cal Prowler, which he didn't before.
There's a Brazen Scourge, an Experimental Aviator, Self-Assembler, Unlicensed Disintegration, but he doesn't really have the means to splash. Sometimes you'll see people go 3 colors in this deck because they have 2 Renegade maps, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and Prophetic Prism and whatnot.
Sure.
But Experimental Aviator does a lot of what this deck wants. It's like a much worse Maverick Thopterist, but it's still an exciting card. Also, that gives a little bit more credence to something like Aether Tradewinds if you can pick one of those up late.
And quite possible that card will come all the way around the table. So Inventor's Apprentice, Thriving Grubs, Well-Fast Monitor, another Pyrohelix. Very excited flick to the front for the Longfin Skywhale.
Yeah, that's a card that has gotten a lot more interesting because blue can skew a little bit more aggressive now than it used to be. Because Longfin Skywhale is a great set of stats for the cost. I mean, 4 mana, 4/3 flyer is very, very good. So I think that now that there's good blue attacking decks, you're going to see the Skywhales go a little bit earlier in draft than you would otherwise.
Yeah, and Marcio seemed pretty animated to take that card.
Oh, yeah.
Fabrication Module, Era of Innovation, Consulate Skygate. I mean, not something that ties into his aggressive strategy, but is an enabler for improvise.
Yeah, it's a way to cast your Sweatworks Brawler on turn 3. Whether or not Marcio plays the Skygate, it's really going to depend on his final artifact count, but it is one of those fringe playables that could make its way in there.
Yeah. And then looking through this pack, Malphus Doorbuster, that card seems
that's
like a
gift.
nice pickup for him.
Malphus Doorbuster is very aggressive. Ardor Express is actually kind of interesting in these decks because they have a lot of higher power creatures, but Malphus Doorbuster is just a very, very good card if you're intending to attack your opponent. Just making their creatures unable to block means that you can really punish them for not having enough creatures.
Right. And again, especially when you have the menace from those Sweatwork Brawlers.
Are there 2 Aetherflux Reservoirs in the draft?
Could we see it? There's a Tezzeret's Ambition for him.
A little bit slower than I think that he would like to be. Overall, I would say that Marcio is displeased with this pack of Kaladesh.
It's been a little underwhelming for him.
And now we're back to the beginning here. Glassplayer's Puzzle Knot does do a lot of what the deck wants, at least.
Yeah, it's an artifact, and also he could use the energy, but takes the High Spire Artisan. This isn't League. He is going to be playing at the table. Maybe he just
that is a defensive
doesn't
draft
want
there.
to deal with it. I kind of like the Glassplayer's Puzzle Knot there, though.
I think that not taking Puzzle Knot kind of indicates that Marcio's likely not playing the Consulate Skygate, just because the Puzzle Knot seems like it does maybe a little bit more for him, but it's going to depend on his final artifact count for sure.
Well, there is another Puzzle Knot. There's a Thriving Turtle. Seems like a fine pickup. No, he is going to take the Puzzle Knot this time. And maybe he knew there was another one coming around. All right, larger than life. Nothing really exciting there, and we're just winding down those last couple picks that are just, wow.
No one wants the Aetherflux Reservoir?
And no one wants the Thriving Turtle, which is,
Yeah, energy cards in general have gone down in value with the advent of Aether Revolt.
Yeah, just much fewer payoffs for it. Yeah. The payoffs are often just a 1/1 token. How do you, obviously that third pack was a little bit disappointing for Marcio, but how do you think his deck fared? It was great in those first 2 packs.
Overall, I think Marcio's deck is quite good. I think he should be happy with it coming out of the draft. The third pack was, of course, a little bit worse than he had hoped.
All right, well, we're going to see him in action pretty soon. We'll see how that deck played out. For Luis Scott Vargas, is Brian David Marshall.